Hey everyone, this is Maxim from Elementor, and today we are going to have a look at the long-awaited for container element. So that's right, it's finally here, and we are going to have a look at quite a few of the options, what it offers, and why so many people were waiting for it. And let's jump right into it with first having a look at the divception through different Elementor versions, and now what we have with this container element. So in this one here, I have the old DOM that was not optimized. And what I have is just a normal section that's empty, and that's it. And here I have a section with an inner section, both of them with only one column. And we'll have a look at what this gives out. And I also have with a single heading and with a single heading in an inner section. So all one column. So very simple. Let's have a look at what the divception looked like then. So let me refresh the page, and let's right click and let's inspect. Bring it to the bottom. All right. So first, the empty section. Let's have a look at how many divs there were. So let's just right click here and click on expand recursively. And then, so we had the section, and then we had this first kind of container element, and then we had another container element, and into that one, the columns were there. So when you used only one column, of course, it was completely redundant, because then you had the column, and then you had the two container elements for these column, and then you would finally have whatever element is in your single section with a single column. So all in all, we had, including the container itself, like the section, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 container elements to get to whatever element was in there. And that was for without even using any inner section. So now let's have a look at the inner section. So it should be this one here. Let's expand recursively. So this one, of course, essentially we have the same 6 containers or wrapper divs, the same 6 divs, and then we get to the element, which in our case is an inner section. So then it just goes back to, again, we have like those 6 divs again, and then the element would be in the, that's in our inner section. So we have 12 divs just to get a, like essentially a container in a container. We add 12 divs. So when you heard about the divception, or when you got warning on tests like GTmetrix that says 20 divs element, well, that was a problem. And they tried to fix this with the improved div. So let's go now to the current div setup. Okay, here. This first one is the container. So let's skip it for right now, and let's have a look at these two to have a comparison to what we just looked at. So this one is a section, but with the improved DOM that they added, I think in Elementor version 3.1, it's been there for a while now. So now it's like 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Essentially, they removed 2 containers that were completely useless. So now we have like 4 divs, and then we would get in the to the element that would be right there. And right below, I have the inner section within a section. So that one will be essentially the same. So we have those 4, then we have the section, and then we have the 4 again. So all in all, it went from 12 to 8 with this new setup. So if like to have a container in a container, it went from the old DOM setup was 12 divs. What they have improved in 3.1 is 8. And now if we look at the container itself, it's even better than I expected, to be honest. So it's one. It's just a single div. Of course, this is the equivalent of this section. So instead of 4, essentially, to have like a section, now it's 1. So this is so much better. And then if I add an element in there, it will show directly. So let's have a look at this right now. So here I have a heading in a container. And the total amount of divs for this is, so this is the container. And then this is the element directly. Of course, Elementor likes their divs, so there are still a few divs in there. But they have their use. It helps to style, to have background options, border options, all kind of things. Of course, it could be improved. But overall, it went from, well, overall, like in total, we have a single container div, and then we jump right to the element. So instead of having 4, we have 1. So that's a great improvement. And right below, I have this direct comparison. So the exact same heading, but in a section. So, so this is a section. So we have, including the section, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we get to the element, which is another 3 divs. So in total, we have like 7 divs. And then the heading in inner section, well, it will be another 4, so it will be 11 in total. And with the all divs setup, to have the heading in an inner section, that was quite the quite the div tree. So we had all of these all the way up to here. So in total, there was like 15 divs to get to this H2 header. Now with the container, we get to the heading in 4 divs, so it's essentially so much better. I would say the divs option is not a problem at all anymore. Okay, so let's have a look now at the editor. The first thing is the containers. When you go on the layout, we have a few options. I'm looking at a beta preview. I should mention this. So let's say you wanted to test the beta preview right now. You could search the WordPress repository for Elementor beta. You install it, you activate, and then you will have the option to update Elementor and Elementor Pro to the beta version. And then you will have access to all the beta stuff. Don't do this on any production website, of course. This is just for testing. And there are still a few bugs. So now you see by default, this percentage is picked, but we see the pixel value, the default 1140 pixels for the width. So there are a few little bugs, like for example, here the direction. When you add a new container, it defaults to column. But then if you change like to default, well, the default is not column, it's row. But for some reason, whenever you add a new container just now, it has column set up. So yeah, that's probably something they will fix before they release this in the actual version. And then we have all the flex options, because of course this is a flex container. They could as well have called it flex container, and then maybe at some point add a grid container. That would be great. But I'm quite happy that they finally have this flex container. So we have all the flex options. So the flex direction, row, column, reverse row, reverse column. We'll get back to this a little bit later. First, let's talk about the HTML tag. If I go back on the front end, let's just go to this container here. So you might notice, or maybe not, if I'm very used to look at the DOM and the HTML setup and everything, but not everyone looks at this all the time. So this container, the default is a div, whereas all the Elementor sections, they always add the default tag of being a section. And this probably led to some not completely optimal HTML5, like not following the best practices of HTML5 to have all these sections set up with a section tag, because rather they were more like just divs. Most of the times they were used as divs and not as section for most users. Of course, it doesn't really matter too much. Like it's not, Google won't penalize you really in any way if you have your tags a little bit wrong like this. But still, it was not proper, so I'm glad that now the default is div. And when you want to use your container as like really a section, you can still change it to section. So I wanted, or to anything else, of course. Like we have the choice of which HTML tag we want. So that's great, and we should use this. We should select the one that fits the purpose like the best. So in most cases, it will probably be div. Okay, so now let's jump into what's these all these options, and so I have a small demo set up and how to use them. So here I have a container, of course, and then I have 3 images that are set to their width 210. So that's something I should mention first. It's no longer hidden in a position dropdown. The positioning options are now directly under advanced for every element. And now here we can set the width and we can set the position, absolute or fixed. So both of these were under a positioning tab, but now they are directly here. So I set them to width. So you will, when you will use the Flex container to properly use all these properties, like to their full extent, you will need to get used to using the width to the elements, because by default, it's always 100% in Elementor. The width, it's always like this is the same as when you just add an image. Well, it's always 100% width. But when it's set like this, you don't have the full flexibility of flex, pun not intended. So what you really want is to get used to set a width to everything that you add. And then you will have so much more success by using this Flex container and not having to add a bunch of containers to get to the design you want. Okay, so let's get back to my 210 pixels. It's a little bit buggy. All right, so now I have 3 images all set to width 210. And another thing to mention about this is now these width here that you see for the image element in particular, I think you should pretty much just ignore them most of the time and use the width here under advanced. So because if you use this one, the width that is set here is not to the container element, but to a child element of it. The container will still have 100% width, so you won't be able to use the flex options. They won't work because the container will still be 100%. So it's much better to set the width here under advanced, which control the container width, and then the image itself just like sizes down accordingly to fit in the container, instead of using these options here. Of course, it will depend on some case. Sometimes it will be useful to use these options as well, but for the most part, you will want to use the width here. So now, like I mentioned earlier, when you add a container, at least for now, it just adds it to column. This is not what anyone that used Elementor was used to. They were used to the default, which is row. So you will probably want to change this to row. And now it's more familiar when we set a custom width under advanced. Then if there was enough room for the elements to stack in a row, well, that's what they would do. So this is how the Elementor sections used to work. And to start with, maybe before until you get very familiar with Flex, I think you should just use this default for most cases. That's what we want anyway. But I will explain a bit now what's the difference between them. Okay, so now you might be wondering why there is like this extra space here. This is just because I have a min height set to the section, so of 700. Well, I could remove it for this demo. So let's start with no min height set. Okay, so now we have the direction set to row, and we can start looking at this setting. So align items. This it won't change anything because now it's flex row and there is no vertical room to play with. So they will just be, it just doesn't change anything because the container height has no extra room. And justify content, the default is flex start, what we have now. So all the image are aligned to the left in effect. So if you want to center them, you select justify content center when you're in a row. All of this is reversed when you're in column. I will get back to this, but yeah, keep that in mind. And then flex end gets to the end, space between. It leaves like the most space in between the elements, but not to the left or right of the first and last element. Space around, it's a kind of average of everything. And then space evenly is a similar idea where all the spacing are the same. So you can see this spacing is the exact same as this one, and as this one. Most often you will want something either like space between, center, or just start. This is the most common one that you will want when you have the direction set to flex row. And then the spacing, this is just the spacing in between the elements. So like this was 20, this is the default. If I remove it, it's the default of 20. And wrap, I will get back to it a little bit later. So now let's see what happens if we change the direction to column. Now it will be the opposite. All these justify content won't change anything because the height is already like restricted by the content, by this image. There is no extra height to play with. So these don't change anything now, but now these will. So now the default is flex start. If center, well, the elements are stuck, but in the center, flex end, they are stuck at the end. And then stretch cannot be properly demonstrated with what I have now. So let's just ignore it for now. All right, so let's create a small design using this flex container. So now I added a min height of 700 pixels. The direction is still row. Align items is the default. I will just remove it. It's redundant. Flex start. And then justify content. In this case, because I have all the image set to 33.3%, the tree image. So there is not really any space for the justify content to matter. So as you see, it's all the same. So we can essentially remove it. So we don't have any option set up really except the direction set to row, and we have a min height set on the container. Now we will go directly on the elements themselves, and we will use the align self property. And along with the min height that's set to the container, when I will use the align self on this one, let's set it to center. Well, now because the container height is greater than the content height, they have, when we use align self, they have space to move. Like the height is greater, so they can be aligned in this container all the way down to here, to the 700 pixel min height. So in this one, let's set it to flex end. And now we have this, this nice little design. So that's one of the advantage. Like to do this before would have required custom CSS or maybe using some padding, but here we don't use padding. So the design is much more responsive and like for different screen size, different monitors, and also for different if you are on mobile, when they will stack, you won't need to undo the padding on mobile. All right, so here I have another container with a single icon box in it. I have a min height set to the container, and we'll go through again the direction and the settings quickly just to demonstrate. This is a great way to quickly have like a good preview what is what. Okay, so first let's start with the default direction, which is row, and then adding items. So the default is flex start. Then we can center, and we can set to flex end. Stretch doesn't really work with this demo. And then, so let's say we wanted to have it center. And then justify content, its default is flex start. We can have it to the center, to the flex end, and any variation thereof. So in that way, it's very flexible. Space between, space around, and space evenly needs to have more than one child, as we have a. Now, of course, with only one element, these won't work. All right, so let's move on to something a little bit more basic that used to be very simple with the sections in Elementor. Let's see how we can accomplish the same with the container. So you might have noticed in the demo earlier that the background color that's applied to the container doesn't go all the way, unlike the background color that's applied to this section here. And that was kind of one of the advantage of using these sections with all the divs, is it made stuff like this. You didn't even have to think about it, but now you will pretty much have to. So with the container, unless of course you choose to keep using the sections as before, which you will be able to as well. But for those of you who want to switch over to the container, which of course I recommend, as it's much better HTML markup and better practices and several reasons that we've seen already. So how do you make it? Essentially, how do you make like this little design here, but with the container elements instead? So here I have replicated it, as you can see, and this is using the containers. Let me scroll down a bit, and let's have a look at how many divs were needed until we get to the element. So this is the element. So just two divs were needed, a container and then a container within the container. And that's it. So let's have a look from the navigator so that it's a little bit more clear. So here we have the container, and then we have a container within, and then we have the heading. So the first container needs to be set to full width, so width 100%. And the background color needs to be set to this parent container. And then also we need to have the align items set to center, or if you have it set to row, then you need the justify content set to center. Because now if I zoom out, you see the inner container is aligned to the flex start. So if I set it to flex center, now we have the equivalent. So either you have align items set to center if you have column direction, or if you have row direction, then you need justify content set to center. And with the row direction and the justify content center, now we replicate this container essentially becomes this like inner container essentially becomes a column that we are so used to. And that's exactly how it works. So that's how you can get this this boxed design with the background going all the way. So how many containers can we add in a container? I'm certain that's a question you are wondering. I am also wondering, so let's try. Let's add this container in this container, and then let's just duplicate it. And let's add it in there. I'm not certain why when I duplicate it, it's not, well, of course it won't add itself in itself. So let's just add it in. If it will allow me. So it looks like we can have quite I think there is no limit. And we need to realize that even with this like very complex setup of like 6 containers in them, and then let's say we add the heading inside the innermost one, if it will allow me. All right, so even this, it still has like the same amount of divs that what a normal section would have, like a. So now you can really be free to use essentially as many containers as you want, and you don't have to worry anymore about having a kind of div nightmare. Of course, I would not recommend using as many of this. Use as little as you need. That's always the best practices. Use just what you need. But it's just good that it's not something that we need to worry about. And having this flexibility, we will be able to really like design exactly what we want, exactly what we need. And it's just something less that we have to think about. So that's really great. All right, so let's now move on to this design, which is possible with a little bit of CSS, unfortunately. I hope the devs will make it possible without any CSS. But still now it's much easier to create an horizontal scroll div, and this will work right away on mobile. So let me go down. So it works on desktop if you use the shift and the wheel, or of course if you use the scroll bar directly. And then on mobile, it just works as you would expect. So this is really amazing. What we can now do almost without any code. And the code is pretty simple, so let me show you this right now. Let's actually just replicate this. So first, let's add a container, which is the default if you have that option set. Otherwise, if you don't have this option set, clicking here will still add a section. So this depends on the option that's set under the settings, experiments, and then here there is so here container. So if you have this to active, then you will have all the new sections created. Essentially, they will be just a container element. Okay, so and let me just duplicate this icon box to save a little bit of time. Let's add a bit of top margin just so that we have. Okay, so this icon box is set to width 50%. So this is important, and that's what makes it like this width. And then if I add a few more, so all right, so now we have the icon box that we need. All of them have width 50%, but there are a few issues, of course. So now it's the same problem that I keep mentioning. The default is not the true default. It's the column for some reason. So let's go to row. So now it works. And this column, the wrap is set to no wrap by default. So that's why it's just kind of overflowing. If I was to set it to wrap, then they would just kind of stack in the container. And now for some reason, they don't stack in a row with each other. Maybe this is just a little bit too wide. Sometimes, usually when it's 50%, it should stack. Maybe it's just a bug also. Let's go 49. All right, 49. By style. All right, so now Now this is what we are after. And then paste style, and then let's just duplicate this. Okay, so now back to the container. So it looks like they made the default to be no wrap, which is interesting. But yeah, I'm not certain why. I think the default should have been wrap, where when you add several items, they will just, when there is no more room, it will go below. So that's a great way to create a grid with as few divs as possible. But for now, anyway, the default is no wrap. And the overflow, we need to set it to auto. But we don't have this option. So now what happens is the overflow is just the page horizontal scroll. It's just like not at all what we want. So we'll need a little bit of custom CSS for this. But hopefully, I really hope the devs will add the overflow here and set it to auto. That would be great. That's something that's like obvious and very easy to add, and it would be so helpful. In any case, now we'll just write selector and then set the overflow to auto. And now right away, we have a horizontal scroll div with icon box in it. So how easy was that? Like how simple was that? I think that's really great now, how easy we can get to this. And on mobile, again, it will just work right away, and we won't have this ugly scroll bar on mobile just because it doesn't default to this. So very easy way to create this. Now how I got the styling here, and you might also notice that now they are kind of squished, and it's not 49% anymore. It's if I zoom out a little bit, it's like, I don't know, it's like almost 33%, almost 3 of them fit. So that's because for some reason the flex shrink is set to 1. So it just makes them shrink as much as they can while still respecting the content. So essentially, the word heading is what makes the width of the icon box, no matter what I have set here. So I can demonstrate this to you by simply increasing, let's say, the font a little bit. So now you see it just pushed everything to the right a bit. It's now wider just because now this heading is larger. So let's go back to the consistent design, and hopefully they will give this flex shrink option. But for now, we can use CSS. So that's what I've done here. So the flex shrink property needs to be set to the child elements. So, but to all of them. So instead of adding the CSS to each and every single one of them, I added selector, which is the container, and then div to select directly all the elements that's in it. So let's just bring this over to this container that now for some reason I don't really have access to. Anyway, let's use the navigator. Here it is. And let's add this. And now flex shrink. And now we are back to work 49% width essentially. It looks much better this way. So everything is perfect now regarding this. And how to style the scroll bar. I will add this, add a link to the description so that you can get this code. But essentially, it's just CSS that works for Chrome and all Chromium browsers. And then except this one here at the start, it works for Firefox and Firefox only. So you will want to style kind of both of these so that you have something consistent across pretty much all browsers. This works for WebKit browsers, so Safari, Chrome, everything Chromium, and this works for Firefox browsers. Actually, I don't remember if this works for Safari. I think it does, but might have to check again. On Safari, anyway, the scroll bar they look much better by default. So okay, so now we are back to the nice scroll bar. the horizontal scroll and everything. All of this with minimal CSS. Of course, when you will want a horizontal scroll div only on mobile, then it will be very simple. You won't really need this scroll bar styling. You will just need this. And hopefully at some point you won't even need this CSS. It will be right in the option for the container to disable flex shrink on the child elements and to have the overflow set to auto. All right, so here is another design that used to be very complex to create with Elementor, but that's now became very, very easy. So we have the container set to row. Importantly, the spacing is set to 0. And then wrap is set to wrap. And in it, we have 6 icon boxes. So the design I'm talking about is to have 6, let's say like 6 icon boxes in a row on desktop, but then 3 on tablet, and 2 or 1 on mobile. This used to be almost impossible. You would have to custom code the whole thing, and now it's very simple indeed. So the only thing you need is the settings I already mentioned in the container. And then on your icon box, you simply set the width to, in this particular case, let's say you wanted to replicate this. So to have 6 in a row, it's 16.6% each on desktop. And then on tablet, it's 33.3% to have 3 in a row. And then finally, of course, on mobile, it's 50%. And that's it. We have this like very difficult to get design before. That's now very easy to get. So that's definitely, that's pretty awesome. All right, so I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoy, and I will see you very soon. Cheers.